The deafening crack of a revolver shot split the night air as Willow Ziegler ducked behind the overturned wagon, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. This wasn't how she'd imagined her journey west would end, pinned down by bandits in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest settlement, with nothing but a dwindling water supply and the torn remnants of her dreams. The year was 1875, and the promise of a new life in Montana territory had turned into a fight for survival on the unforgiving frontier. "Give yourself up, lady," a gruff voice called from the darkness. "We just want the horses and whatever valuables you got." Willow pressed her back against the weathered wood of the wagon, feeling splinters dig into her shoulder through the thin fabric of her dress. Her fingers tightened around the small Derringer pistol, her father's parting gift before she'd left Boston 3 months ago. It held only 2 shots, and she'd never fired it at a person before. "I've got nothing worth dying for," she shouted back, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just some clothes and personal effects." A harsh laugh followed. "Then you won't mind if we take a look-see." The sound of approaching footsteps made her blood run cold. Willow closed her eyes, preparing to use one of her precious bullets, when the night erupted with the thunder of hoofbeats and a volley of gunfire. Shouts and curses filled the air, followed by the retreating sounds of men scrambling to escape. "You still alive behind that wagon?" a deep voice called minutes later. Willow hesitated, unsure if this was another threat or salvation. "I'm armed," she warned, her voice wavering slightly. "Madam, if I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't have run off those bandits first." Slowly, Willow peered around the edge of the wagon. A tall figure sat atop a magnificent chestnut stallion, the man's face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. As he dismounted and stepped into the moonlight, she caught her breath. He moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to the saddle, tall and broad-shouldered in a dusty duster coat. "Name's Hayes Young," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Deputy Marshal out of Fort Benton." Relief flooded through her, making her knees weak. "Willow Ziegler. I was headed to Helena." He glanced at her broken wagon wheel and the remains of her small camp. "Looks like you've had some trouble even before those bandits showed up." "The wheel broke yesterday morning," she admitted. "I was hoping to fix it myself, but—" She gestured helplessly at the splintered wood. Hayes surveyed the area with practiced eyes. "Those men might return with reinforcements. It's not safe here." He turned those startlingly blue eyes on her. "My cabin's about 2 hours' ride from here. We can shelter there tonight and figure out your situation in the morning." Willow hesitated, weighing her options. Staying alone was clearly dangerous, but riding off with a stranger, even a marshal, carried its own risks. As if reading her thoughts, he handed her his badge. "You can keep that until you feel safe," he said simply. "And I'll give you this." He pulled a revolver from his belt and offered it to her, handle first. "A Derringer's fine for close work, but you might want something with more persuasion." The gesture, more than his badge, convinced her. A man who would arm a woman he'd just met wasn't planning to take advantage of her. Willow nodded and began gathering her most essential belongings. Hayes helped her secure what they could salvage to his horse, then offered his hand to help her mount. "I'll walk alongside," he said. "Diablo here can carry your things and you, but adding my weight might be asking too much after the day's ride." As they set off under the vast Montana sky, Willow found herself studying her rescuer. Hayes Young walked with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in the wilderness. His face, now visible in the moonlight, was weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble. He wasn't classically handsome like the gentlemen of Boston, but there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had in months. "What brings a woman like you out here alone?" he asked after they'd traveled in silence for some time. Willow considered deflecting the question but found herself answering honestly. My parents died last year, influenza. There was nothing left for me in Boston except debts and unwanted marriage proposals from men who suddenly found me interesting once they realized my father's shipping business could be theirs. She adjusted her position on the saddle. I have an aunt in Helena who offered me a place to stay until I can establish myself. Hayes nodded, seeming to understand what she wasn't saying. The West can be a place for new beginnings. That's what I'm counting on, she replied softly. They arrived at his cabin well after midnight. It was small but sturdily built, nestled against a hillside with a creek running nearby. Inside was unexpectedly neat, with simple furnishings that spoke of care rather than luxury. You can take the bed, Hayes said, lighting a lamp. I'll make up something on the floor. I couldn't possibly, Madam Willow, he corrected himself. I've slept on ground harder than this floor for weeks at a time. One night won't trouble me. His tone was gentle but firm. Too exhausted to argue, Willow accepted his offer. Despite her fatigue, sleep came fitfully, her mind replaying the attack and dwelling on her uncertain future. When dawn broke, she rose to find Hayes already awake, coffee brewing on the small stove. Thought we might ride into Silver Creek today, he said, handing her a steaming cup. It's a small settlement about 10 miles west. They've got a decent wheelwright who might be able to help with your wagon. Willow wrapped her hands around the warm mug. That's very kind, but I can't impose further on your time. Hayes shrugged. I'm heading that direction anyway. Part of my patrol route. The ride to Silver Creek revealed a different side of Hayes Young. In daylight, she noticed the small scars on his hands, the lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, which he did more often than she would have expected from his serious demeanor the night before. He pointed out landmarks, named wildflowers she'd never seen, and told her about the territory with obvious pride. Silver Creek proved to be little more than a wide spot in the trail, a general store, saloon, smithy, and a handful of cabins clustered around a creek crossing. Their arrival drew curious stares from the few people visible on the dusty street. Marshal Young, the shopkeeper, emerged from the general store, a balding man with spectacles perched on his nose. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Elijah, Hayes nodded in greeting. This is Miss Ziegler. Her wagon broke down about 15 miles east. She could use some assistance getting to Helena. Elijah studied Willow with undisguised curiosity. We don't get many Eastern ladies passing through, he said, noting her clothing. Especially not ones traveling alone. I'm not as fragile as I appear, Willow replied with a smile, though the shopkeeper's assessment stung. She'd already faced more challenges in 3 months of travel than in her entire previous life. While Hayes spoke with the wheelwright, Willow took the opportunity to purchase supplies. The store's inventory was limited compared to Boston's shops, but she found the necessities and information. Elijah's wife, Martha, proved to be the settlement's unofficial chronicler, happy to share everything from local history to personal gossip. Marshal Young's been through a lot, Martha confided as she wrapped Willow's purchases in brown paper. Lost his wife and little girl to fever about 5 years back. Doesn't talk about it much, but it changed him. Used to smile more from what I hear. Willow glanced through the window to where Hayes stood talking with the wheelwright, his stance relaxed but alert. That's terrible, she said softly, feeling a sudden kinship in their shared losses. He's a good man, Martha continued. Saved this settlement more than once from outlaws. Fair, 2 won't shoot a man if there's another way. Some think that makes him soft, but I call it decent. Before Willow could respond, the shop door opened and Hayes entered. Good news, he announced. Tom can fix your wagon wheel, but it'll take a couple of days to get it right. He's sending someone to retrieve the wagon now. A couple of days, Willow echoed, uncertain where she would stay in this tiny settlement. Martha spoke up immediately. You'll stay with us, of course. We've got a spare room since our Josephine married and moved to Helena. She turned to her husband. Isn't that right, Elijah? The shopkeeper nodded, though with less enthusiasm than his wife. Of course, can't have you sleeping at the saloon. Relief flooded through Willow. That's incredibly kind. I can pay, of course. We'll discuss that later, Martha said, waving away her concerns. Now, you must be hungry after your ordeal. The next 2 days passed in an unexpected rhythm. Willow helped Martha in the store during the day, finding comfort in the simple tasks and the older woman's motherly presence. Hayes appeared each morning and evening, ostensibly to check on the wagon's progress, but lingering to share meals and conversation. On the evening before her departure, Willow found herself sitting on the shopkeeper's porch with Hayes, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. A comfortable silence had settled between them, broken only when he spoke. I've arranged to escort you to Helena, he said. It's a 4-day journey if the weather holds. Willow turned to look at him, surprised. Is that part of your duties as marshal? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not officially. But I have business in that direction, and traveling alone isn't safe, especially for a woman, she finished, arching an eyebrow. For anyone, he corrected gently. These territories can be unforgiving. Even experienced frontiersmen make mistakes out here. She knew she should decline his offer, maintain the proper distance expected between a lady and a gentleman who was nearly a stranger. Instead, she found herself nodding. I would appreciate the company. The morning they departed dawned clear and cool. Willow's repaired wagon looked sturdy enough, loaded with her belongings and additional supplies courtesy of Martha's insistence. Hayes rode alongside, occasionally pointing out features of the landscape or warning of difficult terrain ahead. By the second day, Willow had begun to realize how much she enjoyed his company. Hayes wasn't a talkative man, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. He listened to her stories of Boston with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, and shared his own experiences of the frontier without embellishment. They made camp that evening beside a small stream, the wagon serving as a windbreak. After a simple meal of beans and biscuits, they sat by the fire as the stars emerged overhead, more brilliant than Willow had ever seen them. It's beautiful, she murmured, gazing upward. In Boston, the gas lamps and coal smoke obscure most of the stars. That's one thing I could never give up, Hayes replied, following her gaze. The sky out here, it reminds you of your place in the world. And what place is that? He stoked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. Small, temporary, but not insignificant, he glanced at her. Sorry, that sounds rather philosophical for a marshal. No, she said quickly. I understand exactly what you mean. When my parents died, I felt untethered, as if everything solid had suddenly vanished. But sitting here under this sky, I feel both smaller and somehow more connected than I have in a long time. Hayes was watching her now, his expression difficult to read in the firelight. You're unlike any Eastern woman I've met, he said finally. Willow laughed softly. I'll take that as a compliment, though I'm not certain it was intended as one. It was, he assured her, his voice low. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps of shared understanding despite their different backgrounds. Willow found herself acutely aware of his presence across the fire, the breadth of his shoulders, the way the firelight caught in his eyes. We should get some rest, Hayes said, breaking the spell. Tomorrow's trail climbs through rougher country. Willow nodded, retreating to the wagon while Hayes spread his bedroll nearby. Sleep eluded her for hours as she replayed their conversation, wondering at the strange, fluttering sensation in her chest when he looked at her. The third day brought challenges as Hayes had predicted. The trail narrowed and steepened, forcing them to move slowly. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered over the mountains, and the air carried the metallic scent of approaching rain. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles ahead," Hayes called over the rising wind. "Used by cattlemen during roundup. We should aim for that before the storm hits." They barely reached the small cabin before the skies opened. Rain pounded the wooden roof as Hayes led the horse and wagon under a lean-to attached to the side of the structure. The shack itself was primitive, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough plank floor, and a narrow cot pushed against one wall. "It's not much," Hayes apologized, shaking water from his hat. "But it's dry." Willow looked around, grateful for any shelter from the deluge outside. "It's perfect." Hayes busied himself building a fire while Willow changed into dry clothes behind a blanket hung across one corner. The small space quickly warmed, and the steady drumming of rain created a cocoon of isolation from the outside world. They shared the last of Martha's biscuits and some dried beef for dinner, sitting close to the fire as thunder rumbled overhead. The storm showed no signs of abating as night fell. "You should take the cot," Hayes said, echoing their first night at his cabin. Willow shook her head. "It's too small for you to be comfortable on the floor. I can make a bed with blankets." "I won't hear of it," he insisted. "My mother would haunt me if I let a lady sleep on a plank floor while I took a bed." "Your mother sounds like a formidable woman," Willow smiled. Something softened in Hayes's expression. "She was. Crossed the Oregon Trail with my father in '49, lost 3 children along the way but never lost her dignity or her faith." He poked at the fire. "She'd have liked you." The casual comment warmed Willow more than the fire. "And I think I would have liked her." Hayes nodded, then rose to check that the horse was secure for the night. When he returned, his coat was once again damp from the rain. Without thinking, Willow reached out to take it from him, her fingers brushing against his. The contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through her. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than before. Willow hung the coat near the fire and returned to her seat, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands or where to look. The cabin seemed smaller, the air between them charged with something unspoken. "Tell me about your wife," she said abruptly, then immediately regretted the intrusion. "I'm sorry Martha mentioned. I shouldn't have asked." Hayes was silent for so long that Willow thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was quiet but steady. "Her name was Sarah. We met when I first came west, just after the war. She was teaching at a mission school near Fort Laramie." A small smile touched his lips. "She had no business marrying a broken ex-soldier with nothing to offer, but she did anyway. We had 5 good years and a beautiful daughter before cholera took them both in '70. "I'm so sorry," Willow whispered. Hayes looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Life out here teaches you that loss is inevitable. It's what you do afterward that matters." "And what did you do?" "Survived. Became a marshal. Tried to make sure other families didn't lose their loved ones to violence, at least." He shrugged slightly. "It's enough most days." Willow thought about her own response to Lost the Flight from Boston, the determination to build something new. "I understand," she said simply. Hayes studied her face. "I believe you do." The air between them seemed to thicken. Willow was acutely conscious of their isolation, the intimacy of sharing this small space while the storm raged outside. She should excuse herself, maintain the proper distance, but she found herself unwilling to break this moment of connection. It's getting late, Hayes said finally, standing. You should take the cot. I insist. Recognizing that further argument would be futile, Willow nodded. Thank you. For everything. She settled onto the narrow cot, pulling a blanket over herself while Hayes arranged his bedroll on the floor nearby. Despite her exhaustion, sleep remained elusive as she listened to the rain and the occasional shifting of Hayes's body on the hard floor. Hayes. She whispered after a long silence. Yes. Do you ever wonder if there's a purpose to it all? The losses, the struggles. In the darkness, she heard him turn toward her voice. Every day, he admitted. I haven't found an answer yet that satisfies me completely. But I've come to believe that connections matter, the people whose lives touch ours, even briefly. They change us, sometimes in ways we don't recognize until later. His words resonated deeply with Willow. I felt more alive these past few days than I have since before my parents died, she confessed. More present. The frontier has a way of stripping things down to what's essential, Hayes replied. No room for pretense when survival is at stake. It's not just the frontier, Willow said softly. It's you. The confession hung in the air between them. Willow held her breath, waiting for his response, uncertain what she wanted him to say. You should get some sleep, Hayes said finally, his voice gentle but distant. We have a long ride tomorrow. Disappointment washed through her, followed by embarrassment at her forwardness. Of course. Good night, Hayes. Good night, Willow. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world of vibrant colors and clear skies. They set out early, both avoiding mention of their midnight conversation. The trail improved as they descended toward the valley where Helena lay, allowing for easier travel but providing fewer opportunities for the private conversations that had marked their journey thus far. By late afternoon, they could see Helena sprawled below them, a substantial settlement of wooden buildings, mining operations, and scattered homes. Columns of smoke rose from smelters and chimneys, and the distant sounds of activity carried on the breeze. Your aunt's address? Hayes asked as they approached the outskirts of town. Willow pulled a letter from her bag. Pine Street, near the Methodist Church, she wrote. They navigated the bustling streets, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Helena in 1875 was a town in transition, still rough around the edges from its gold rush origins, but developing the institutions of civilization. Churches stood alongside saloons, proper homes near hastily erected miners' shacks. Pine Street proved to be one of the more established residential areas. They stopped before a neat two-story house with a small garden in front. Painted white with green shutters, a slice of Eastern respectability transplanted to Montana territory. Hayes helped Willow down from the wagon, his hands firm at her waist. For a moment they stood close, neither stepping away immediately. Thank you, Willow said, looking up at him. I wouldn't have made it here without your help. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Hayes replied, but I'm glad I could assist. The front door of the house opened, and an older woman emerged, her face lighting with recognition. Willow, is that you? We've been so worried. Aunt Margaret hurried down the path, arms outstretched. Willow moved to meet her, embracing the woman who represented her only remaining family. Your letter said you'd arrive last week, Margaret fussed, holding Willow at arm's length to examine her. We feared something terrible had happened on the road. It nearly did, Willow admitted. If not for Marshal Young, I might not have made it at all. Margaret turned her attention to Hayes, who had removed his hat respectfully. Then we owe you a great debt, Marshal. Please, you must come in for refreshments at the very least. Hayes glanced at the setting sun. That's kind, madam, but I should find lodgings before dark. Nonsense, Margaret insisted. We have a guest room that's perfectly suitable. My husband will want to thank you properly for delivering our niece safely." Willow watched Hayes waver, clearly torn between propriety and Margaret's genuine hospitality. "Please," she added softly. "It would mean a great deal to me." Something in her voice must have convinced him. "If you're certain it's no imposition," he conceded. The evening passed pleasantly as Margaret and her husband Thomas welcomed Willow and made Hayes feel like an honored guest rather than a stranger. Thomas, a former judge from Philadelphia who had come west for his health, was particularly interested in Hayes's experiences as a marshal. "Law and order are the foundation of civilization," Thomas declared over after dinner brandy. "Men like you are essential to the territory's development." Hayes accepted the compliment modestly. "Most folks out here just want to live in peace. My job is simpler than it might appear." "Nonsense," Thomas waved a hand. "I've seen enough of the frontier to know the challenges you face. In fact, Helena is establishing a proper circuit court, and we're in need of experienced lawmen. Have you considered a more permanent position?" Willow, who had been listening quietly, found herself holding her breath at the question. "I haven't," Hayes admitted. "I've grown accustomed to the freedom of the trail." "Something to consider," Thomas said. "A man shouldn't spend his entire life alone in the wilderness." Margaret tactfully changed the subject, but Willow caught Hayes watching her throughout the remainder of the evening, his expression thoughtful. The next morning, Willow rose early and found Hayes already in the garden, preparing his horse for departure. The sight sent an unexpected pang through her chest. "You're leaving already?" she asked, stepping outside. Hayes turned, and for a moment something unguarded crossed his face, a flash of emotion quickly contained. "Best to get an early start. I have duties to attend to." Willow approached, stopping a few feet from him. "Will you return to Silver Creek?" "Eventually. I patrol a large territory." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words. Willow searched for something meaningful to say, some way to express what these few days had meant to her. "Hayes, you'll do well here," he interrupted gently. "Your aunt and uncle are good people. Helena's growing into a proper city. You'll find the opportunities you came west for." "Yes," she agreed, though the prospect suddenly seemed less appealing than it had a week ago. "But I've learned that the journey itself can be as important as the destination." Hayes nodded, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. "Safe journeys, then, Willow Ziegler." He extended his hand. Willow took it, feeling the strength and warmth of his fingers around hers. "And to you, Hayes Young." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, tipped his hat, and rode away without looking back. Willow watched until he disappeared around a corner, an emptiness spreading through her chest that she hadn't anticipated. The weeks that followed were filled with adjustments to her new life. Helena proved to be more civilized than Willow had expected, with genuine cultural aspirations alongside its frontier pragmatism. Margaret introduced her to the town's social circles, while Thomas helped her navigate the legal aspects of establishing herself in the territory. Yet something was missing. Willow found herself comparing the carefully mannered conversations at social gatherings to the honest exchanges she'd shared with Hayes under the stars. The comfortable home her aunt and uncle provided felt confining after the open spaces of the trail. Even the young men who began calling at the house respectable miners and merchants, who had achieved success, seemed pale imitations of the quiet strength she had encountered in Hayes Young. "You seem restless, dear," Margaret observed one evening as they sat in the parlor, Willow's needlework lying neglected in her lap. "Are you not happy here?" "I'm grateful for your kindness," Willow assured her. "It's just an adjustment." Margaret studied her niece's face. "Is there something or someone you left behind on your journey?" The perceptive question caught Willow off guard. No, she said quickly, then amended. Not exactly. I met people who made me see things differently, that's all. People or a particular person, Margaret pressed gently. Willow looked away. It doesn't matter. He has his life and I have mine. My dear girl, Margaret said, setting aside her own sewing, at my age you learn that very little matters more than finding someone who makes you see the world differently. She smiled at her niece's surprised expression. Thomas and I may seem conventional now, but our marriage scandalized Philadelphia society. He was a widower with 2 children, and I was considered firmly on the shelf at 32. We defied expectations because we recognized something rare between us. This is different, Willow protested weakly. Is it? Margaret raised an eyebrow. You haven't been the same since Marshal Young rode away. I'm not blind, dear. Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. It was just a few days on the trail. We barely know each other. Sometimes a few days can reveal more than years of drawing-room conversations, Margaret replied. The question is, what do you intend to do about it? Do. There's nothing to be done. He's gone back to his duties and I'm here. Margaret regarded her with gentle exasperation. For an intelligent young woman, you can be remarkably obtuse. This is the West, my dear. Women here make their own choices in ways unthinkable back east. She rose and crossed to a small writing desk. Thomas mentioned that Marshal Young would be in Fort Benton next week for the territorial court sessions. Perhaps you might wish to send a message. Willow stared at her aunt, stunned by the suggestion. What would I possibly say? The truth, dear, Margaret said simply. It's always a good place to start. For 3 days, Willow wrestled with the idea, drafting and discarding a dozen versions of a letter. What could she say that wouldn't seem forward or desperate? How could she express feelings she was only beginning to understand herself? In the end, opportunity arrived in unexpected form. Thomas returned from a meeting with the territorial governor, announcement in hand. They're organizing a teacher for the new school, he informed them over dinner. Someone with Eastern education would be ideal, but few qualified individuals are willing to take on the challenge of frontier education. Willow looked up sharply. Where is this school? Silver Creek, Thomas replied. Small settlement but growing. The territorial government is trying to establish proper schools in even the more remote communities. Margaret caught Willow's eye across the table, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Silver Creek, isn't that where Marshal Young is stationed? Thomas nodded, oblivious to the exchange between the women. Indeed, fine lawmen, the sort of steady presence that helps civilize these territories. I'll do it, Willow said suddenly. Both her aunt and uncle turned to stare at her. Do what, dear? Margaret asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. Teach at the Silver Creek School, Willow declared. I have the qualifications. I assisted at my father's school for underprivileged children in Boston for years. Thomas blinked in surprise. It's a tremendous undertaking, Willow. The conditions would be primitive compared to what you're accustomed to. The pay is minimal. I'm not concerned about the pay, Willow said firmly, and I've already seen that I can adapt to frontier conditions. She straightened her shoulders. This is why I came west, to build something meaningful, to be useful. Thomas studied her with newfound respect. I'll speak to the governor tomorrow. If you're serious, I believe the position could be yours. I'm absolutely serious, Willow assured him, her heart racing with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Later that evening, Margaret found Willow packing her trunks, meticulously sorting through her belongings to determine what would be essential for her new life. You're certain about this? Margaret asked, leaning against the doorframe. Willow paused, a book in her hands. No, she admitted with a small laugh, but I'm doing it anyway. Because of him. Not entirely, Willow said thoughtfully. Those days on the trail showed me something about myself, that I'm stronger than I believed, that I want more from life than safety and convention. She placed the book in her trunk. If Hayes Young wants nothing to do with me, I'll still have purpose in Silver Creek. But I need to know if what I felt, what I think he felt too, was real. Margaret crossed the room and embraced her niece. Your parents would be proud of your courage, Willow, and so am I. 2 weeks later, Willow found herself once again traveling west, this time with an official appointment as Silver Creek's first schoolteacher, and considerably more preparation than her previous journey. Thomas had arranged for a reliable driver and guard to accompany her, along with letters of introduction to the settlement's leading citizens. The familiar landscape brought both anxiety and anticipation as they approached Silver Creek. Would Hayes be there? What would he think of her unexpected return? Had she imagined the connection between them? The settlement appeared largely unchanged, though Willow noted a few new structures since her visit. Their arrival drew attention, with curious faces appearing in doorways and windows as the wagon rolled down the main street. Miss Ziegler, Martha emerged from the general store, surprise and delight illuminating her round face. Is that really you? Willow descended from the wagon, smiling at the shopkeeper's wife. Indeed it is, Mrs. Elijah. I've come to take up the position of schoolteacher. You're our teacher. Martha clapped her hands together. The governor's office sent word we'd be getting someone from back east, but they never mentioned a name. She enveloped Willow in a warm embrace. This is wonderful news. The children need proper education, and heaven knows I tried my best with Sunday lessons, but a real teacher, is the schoolhouse ready? Willow asked, glancing around the settlement. Nearly. The men have been working on it for weeks. It's just beyond the church, you can see the roof from here. Martha's expression turned knowing. Marshal Young will be pleased to hear you've returned. He's been out on patrol these past few days but should return by tomorrow. Willow felt her cheeks warm. How fortunate. I'll need to coordinate with all local officials, of course. Martha's smile widened. Of course, she agreed, not fooled for a moment. Now you'll stay with us until proper accommodations are arranged. The settlement is building a small house for the teacher, but it won't be ready for another month at least. The news of Willow's arrival spread quickly through Silver Creek. By evening, a steady stream of visitors had passed through the Elijah's home, each eager to meet the new teacher and assess her suitability for shaping young minds. Willow answered their questions patiently, demonstrating both her qualifications and her understanding of frontier realities. You'll have children of all ages, the blacksmith's wife warned her, some who have never seen the inside of a proper classroom. And books are scarce, added another woman. My Billy's been reading the same 3 volumes for 2 years now. Willow nodded, making mental notes. I've brought what I could, and my uncle has arranged for more to follow. We'll manage with what we have while building towards something better. Her confidence seemed to reassure the parents, who departed with cautious optimism about the educational prospects for their children. Only after the last visitor had gone did Willow allow herself to acknowledge the nervous anticipation that had been building all day. Tomorrow, Hayes would return. She slept poorly that night, rehearsing what she might say when they met. By morning, she had abandoned all prepared speeches in favor of simply being honest, whatever that might mean in the moment. Martha suggested that Willow visit the schoolhouse, and she gratefully accepted the opportunity to focus on something besides her racing thoughts. The building was simple but solidly constructed, with large windows to provide natural light and a stone fireplace for heating. Rough-hewn benches and tables served as desks, and a larger table at the front would be her domain. Willow was measuring the blackboard space when a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. "I heard Silver Creek had a new teacher. Didn't expect it to be you." She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hayes stood in the entrance, hat in hand, looking much as he had when they parted, perhaps a bit more trail-worn, his clothes dusty from riding. But his eyes were the same clear blue that had haunted her dreams for weeks. "Hello, Hayes," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. He stepped into the schoolhouse, glancing around at the sparse furnishings. "This is a long way from Boston, and from Helena." "Yes," she agreed simply. "Your aunt and uncle approved of this move." Willow lifted her chin slightly. "They supported my decision, though I hardly needed their permission. I'm of age and determined to make my own way." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That sounds like the woman I met on the trail." He moved closer, stopping a few feet away. "Why Silver Creek, Willow?" "There are more established settlements that could use a teacher." The directness of his question demanded equal honesty. Willow took a deep breath. "Because this is where I felt most alive," she said. "On that journey with you, facing challenges I never imagined, seeing the territory through your eyes, it changed me. I couldn't go back to parlors and polite conversation. And that's the only reason." His voice had softened, his eyes intent on her face. Willow's courage nearly failed her, but she forced herself to continue. "No," she admitted. "I came because I couldn't stop thinking about you, about what might have been possible between us if circumstances had been different." Hayes was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Circumstances like what? Like having more time, like not being strangers thrown together by chance." She looked down at her hands. "Like me being someone with experience in this life instead of an Eastern woman you had to rescue." Hayes closed the distance between them, gently lifting her chin until their eyes met. "Willow, you were never just an Eastern woman to me. From the moment you faced down those bandits with nothing but a daring and determination, I knew you were extraordinary." Hope bloomed in her chest. "Then why did you leave so easily in Helena?" "Because I thought that's what you wanted, what you deserved. A comfortable life with your family, in a growing town with prospects and society." His hand moved to cup her cheek. "I'm a marshal with a territory to patrol and not much to offer a woman like you." "You've already offered me more than anyone else ever has," Willow whispered. "Honesty, respect, the chance to discover my own strength." She leaned slightly into his touch. "I don't want comfort and society. I want purpose, and I want—" She hesitated, suddenly aware of how forward she was being. Hayes waited, his thumb brushing lightly over her cheekbone. "What do you want, Willow?" she said simply. "If that's possible." The word hung between them for a heartbeat, before Hayes bent his head, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly deepened with weeks of unspoken longing. Willow's arms slid around his neck as she responded with equal fervor, all propriety forgotten in the revelation of mutual desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "I've thought about doing that since that night in the line shack," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" "Because you deserved better than a man taking advantage of your vulnerability." His arms tightened around her waist. "And because I wasn't sure what I could promise you." Willow pulled back slightly to see his face. "I'm not asking for promises, Hayes. Just a chance to see if what I feel, what I think we both feel, can grow into something lasting." Hayes studied her face, his expression serious. "You need to understand what life with me would mean. I'm often away on patrol. The dangers are real. Silver Creek is growing, but it's still a frontier settlement with few of the comforts you've known." "I'm not afraid of hardship," Willow assured him. "I've already left those comforts behind willingly." "There's something else you should know," Hayes said, his voice dropping. "Something I should have told you before." Concern flickered through Willow. "What is it?" He guided her to one of the benches, sitting beside her but maintaining enough distance to see her face clearly. "After Sarah died, I was lost. I turned to whiskey for a while, neglected my duties. The territorial marshal at the time gave me a choice: get myself together or lose my badge." Hayes paused, his expression somber. "I chose the badge, but those months changed how people saw me. There are still some who remember and judge accordingly." "We all have moments of weakness," Willow said softly. "What matters is what you've done since." Hayes shook his head slightly. "It's not just that. Being with me means accepting that some people will never forget. They'll watch, waiting for me to fail again." He took her hand. "I wouldn't subject you to that scrutiny if you weren't aware of what you're walking into." Willow squeezed his fingers. "Hayes, I left Boston partly because people there saw me only as my father's daughter, first to be married for his wealth, then pitied for his debts. I understand what it means to be defined by others' perceptions." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm more interested in who you are now than who you were at your lowest moment." Relief washed over his features. "How did you get so wise, Willow Ziegler?" "Loss has a way of clarifying what matters," she replied. "And what matters to me is honesty between us above all else." She hesitated, then added, "Which is why there's something I should tell you as well." Hayes waited, his expression open. Willow gathered her courage. "I'm not. That is, before I came west, there was someone in Boston, a relationship that ended badly." She looked down at their joined hands. "I'm not as innocent as a proper lady should be." A moment of silence stretched between them before Hayes responded. "Willow, look at me." She raised her eyes to find not judgment but tenderness in his gaze. "I am not a virgin," she whispered in shame. The corner of Hayes's mouth lifted in a gentle smile. "Then you're experienced enough to love me," he said softly, "with all my imperfections." Relief and joy swept through her at his acceptance. "And you're experienced enough to love me with mine," she replied, her voice stronger. Hayes leaned forward, capturing her lips in another kiss, this one gentle and reverent. When they parted, he stood and offered his hand. "Come on, schoolteacher. I should escort you back to the Elijahs before we cause a scandal on your first full day in Silver Creek." Willow took his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. "Would it be a scandal for the marshal and the teacher to be seen together?" "Not the being seen," he clarified, his eyes twinkling. "The being caught kissing in the schoolhouse might raise some eyebrows, though." They walked back through the settlement hand in hand, drawing curious but largely approving glances from the residents they passed. Martha greeted them at the store with a knowing smile, but limited her comments to an invitation for Hayes to join them for supper. The following weeks established a new rhythm to Willow's life. The school opened with 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years of age, each bringing unique challenges and rewards. Willow found herself adapting her Boston educational theories to frontier realities, incorporating practical knowledge alongside reading and arithmetic. Hayes supported her efforts, sometimes visiting the school to speak with the older boys about law and territorial governance. When his duties took him away, he left with proper goodbyes and returned to increasingly enthusiastic welcomes. Their courtship progressed in full view of the settlement, with most residents offering tacit approval of the match between their respected marshal and dedicated teacher. As autumn approached, bringing the first crisp hints of the coming winter, Hayes asked Willow to join him for a ride one Sunday afternoon. He led her to a small plateau overlooking the valley, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the season's change. "I come here sometimes to think," he said as they dismounted. "The view helps put things in perspective. Willow surveyed the panorama, the settlement below, the winding creek, the distant mountains rising majestic against the sky. "It's beautiful," she agreed. Hayes took her hand, guiding her to a flat rock where they could sit comfortably. "Willow, these past months have been the happiest I've known in years." "For me as well," she said, smiling up at him. "I've been thinking about the future, our future." He turned to face her fully. "My position as marshal means I'll always have responsibilities, dangers. But Judge Wilson has offered me a more permanent role in Helena, overseeing a team of deputies across the Northern Territory. It would mean more stability, less time on the trail." Willow studied his face. "Is that what you want?" "What I want is a life with you," he said simply. "Whether that's here in Silver Creek in Helena or somewhere else entirely." "Hayes Young," Willow said slowly. "Are you proposing to me?" He smiled, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet pouch. "I am." "Not as eloquently as you deserve, perhaps." From the pouch, he produced a ring, a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together." Emotion welled in Willow's throat as he held the ring between them. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Willow Ziegler, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? To build a life together wherever that takes us?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." Hayes slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared adventures and quiet moments alike. They were married a month later in Silver Creek's newly completed church, with Martha and Elijah standing as witnesses and the entire settlement in attendance. Willow wore a dress of cream-colored silk that her aunt had sent from Helena, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a formal veil. The couple established their home in Silver Creek, with Hayes accepting the territorial position that allowed him to base his operations from the growing settlement. Willow continued teaching, expanding the school as new families arrived, drawn by the stability and opportunities the community now offered. 2 years after their wedding, Willow gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah Margaret, honoring both the past and the present. A son, Thomas Hayes, followed 18 months later. Their home became the heart of Silver Creek, a place where justice and education were valued equally, where Eastern refinement blended with frontier practicality. On their 5th anniversary, Hayes took Willow back to the plateau where he had proposed. The view had changed somewhat. Silver Creek had grown from a settlement to a proper town, with more substantial buildings and cleared farmland spreading through the valley. "You ever regret it?" Hayes asked as they stood arm in arm, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. "Leaving civilization for this life," Willow leaned her head against his shoulder. "I didn't leave civilization," she corrected gently. "I helped build it, alongside you and everyone in that valley." She turned in his arms to face him. "Not for a single day have I regretted choosing this path." Hayes brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as tender as it had been on that first day in the schoolhouse. "Nor have I," he said. "You brought light back into my world when I thought those days were behind me. And you showed me strength I never knew I possessed," she replied. "We've built something remarkable together, Hayes Young." As the last rays of sunlight gilded the landscape around them, Hayes bent to kiss his wife, grateful beyond words for the journey that had brought them together, a journey that had begun with shame and ended with love strong enough to forge a future neither could have imagined alone.